Hi there. Welcome back to 48 Days Culture and Connections. That's right. We are actually pivoting in our branding with our show. Those of you who are used to me saying delightful discussions, we are now calling it Culture and Connections. So I am super excited to actually bring on my first guest in the new pivot. This is such an exciting interview for me. In 48 Days, Culture and Connections, we love creating experiences for companies, for entrepreneurs, and small business owners that help enhance their life and their work. And I got to tell you, my guest today definitely will help you do that in so many ways. So, without further ado, stay tuned. We will be right back, and I cannot wait to introduce my guest to you. All right, guys, thank you for joining us. Make sure that you grab a cup of coffee or some water or tea because I guarantee you are not going to want to miss out on this interview. Get your notes, you're going to want to take them. So, today I have the privilege of bringing to you Phil Mershon. He's just written a brand new book, Unforgettable: The Art and Science of Creating Memorable Experiences. He's also been the director of experience for Social Media Examiner. He's been designing social media marketing world for over a decade. If any of you have ever been in the business world at all, you know about social media marketing. You've heard all the stories. You know everyone loves the experience of this event. Phil also loves to create memorable moments and transformational experiences. He's a jazz enthusiast, jazz saxophonist, a pickleball enthusiast, which I am getting into myself. Super fun. Everyone's getting into pickleball these days. And as I mentioned, the author of this amazing book, which I have been telling everybody about, which is why I reached out to Phil to have him on here. So without further ado, I bring to you Phil Mershon.
Hey, thanks for having me on this time.
Hey, I
Had to do
recognize
something
that.
a little bit different because you're all about first impressions. So, why start this off the normal way? Thanks for having me here.
I love that. That's actually one of my favorite songs, and I didn't actually connect the two, but that makes total sense.
There you go.
I love it. Phil, thanks so much for being on my show today. I am just super excited to share you with everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You guys have been huge fans of the book, and I'm actually talking to Dan Miller later today for my podcast. He'll be one of the first guests on that show. So thank you.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Yes. We have just loved this connection. And, that's what we're about at 48 Days is these connections. So I appreciate it. Well, I know I want to just dive right in. I don't even want to waste any time. So, first, can you share with us, Phil, what you do, which I kind of already said, but can you expand on that for us?
Yeah, my full-time job, I'm with Social Media Examiner. I am director of experience, which is a primary focus on social media marketing world, but certainly that feeds into other products and services that we have as a company. So social media marketing world has been around a decade. We're getting ready for our 11th annual. Would be our 12th if it weren't for this little global thing that happened a couple of years ago. So looking forward to that extensively. And I'm literally working on something right now that, looking at your title of first impressions director, made me rethink something even just in the last 5 minutes. Because I'm designing our welcome plan. It's like, wait, we should be calling that our first impressions team, because I'm all about first impressions, and that's really super important. So that's what I do, is like I take all the experiences and try to move them up a level to make it memorable. Just a lot like what's in the book.
I love that. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you were inspired by that. I love a good first impression, and you definitely are so great at that. I mean, we really scammed through your book for our last event, and just how can we make this so memorable? Um, I can't recommend it enough. I really can't. Um, so, can you also tell us, like, you obviously wrote the book. You're clearly passionate about this topic. What inspired you to write it?
So, the long story is I never thought I'd be an author. As a kid, I couldn't write. I didn't like to write. In fact, I hated to write. So you would have never told me that I'm going to be an author someday. But in grad school and seminary, I trained to be a pastor and was a pastor for 10 years. Um, Professors said, Phil, you're going to write a book someday, maybe multiple books. And I was like, yeah, right. But they saw something that I didn't. Well, in 2017, I had a couple of experiences that set me on this path. So the first one was I was at a conference, and while I was at the conference, I was reading from the Bible. There's a story in the book of Joshua where Joshua and the armies are fighting 5 armies at once. He's like, this is too much. So he cries out, God, can you do something? And God makes the sun stand still for a day, as the story goes. And I read that while I'm at this conference, having some profound experiences, and said, aha, that's what we want to see happen. When we're planning events, we want to create this sense where time stretches out. We can't make time stop in that way. That's something only God can do. But we can create this sense that time has ground down to a really slow pace so we can focus on things that matter. So you can fight those 5 armies and not worry about the other armies that are out there someday. So most of us can only fight 1 army at a time, by the way,
Right.
not 5. So I had this thought of, well, that's the book. That's what I'm going to write a book about. Fast forward about 3 or 4 months, and I was just reminded of this yesterday. I forgot this piece of the story. I attended an event with Michael and Amy Port, and they've got a program called Heroic Public Speaking. And I was there, and one of the exercises they have you do is start to think about, well, what is your talk? I'm like, well, I want to kind of outline what my book is. And because I knew the book and the talk would be very connected to each other. So I started to create that outline. And I quickly realized that writing a book about this, Making Time Stand Still, was my original title, is like, that's not possible. I can't teach someone to do that because I don't even know how to do that. So that led me to a discovery of what is in the book of, well, I can give you tools that can create possibilities for that. The possibility of serendipity, the possibility of having these time stretched moments is there if you do all these things. When you make something memorable and even unforgettable, that can happen for some. It's not likely to happen for everyone. And so that's really what led to it, though, is I wanted to figure it out. Like, I love to write to figure stuff out. So I started writing articles and posting them to LinkedIn and other places where I could, and talking about it when I could. And slowly over time, I realized, okay, there's something here. I ended up having hundreds of thousands of words, and you can only put, 40 to 60,000 in a book. They were gracious to let me go to 65,000 with all the extra material. So, but that's kind of how it started, was this aha moment, and then this path of discovery. And it got interrupted by a global pandemic, where I had to stop thinking about it at all because no one cared about in-person events anymore. And then when it started to pick back up, that's when I picked up writing again.
I love that too. And, Phil, you say, no one was interested in person, but I actually feel like this book transcends just events. I'll be honest. And I know I mentioned this to you in our chit chat before. It's made me even think of, as a person, what kind of experience am I leaving people with? I don't know. I know you were surprised by that when we spoke about it, but I think it's great.
Maybe not as a person have I thought about it, but I certainly have been surprised by the kinds of people who responded and say, this is applicable to my hotel. I was talking to a lady who said, my front desk staff, first impressions team, they need this. Yeah. And I've had people in direct marketing who are, doing network marketing parties who say, we need this because we want people to come. First of all, we want them to get a reputation that our parties are worth coming to, and we want them to leave feeling good and not like they've been sold to. And so they need this. So there's so many people that are in the experience design space, and it's an enormous industry when you start looking at computer programmers who are thinking about UX. And then there's, interior designers are thinking about this stuff, and they've been thinking about it for decades. But when you bring all those disciplines together, when you have like this really short-term possibility for creating an experience in 1, 2, or 3 days, are most events that we're doing, then it like brings all these disciplines together that you have to think about, well, how do we do this in a way that we actually set people up for the experience that we hope they have?
So good. You are dropping gold nuggets, I gotta say, already. And we haven't even dove into like the meat. So let's do that. So you mentioned in the book that there's a recipe for creating an amazing event. I'm curious if you just picked your top 3 juiciest or favorite ways to create an amazing event, which 3 would you choose?
So let me clarify. I don't think there is a recipe. I think the recipe is something you have to design for your event with your attendees in mind, because you as 48 days, your audience is similar but different from a marketer's audience that I'm designing experiences for, very different from an audience of engineers in India. So now
Right.
you're adding culture and discipline into the mix. And so I don't think there is a recipe, but I think there are ingredients in the recipe that are more important than others. So let's talk about that. So I use the analogy of bread. And so you can't have a loaf of bread without 4 main ingredients. So actually 3 of them, because one of them you can choose to leave out, but it will be a very different experience. And those are flour, water, salt, and yeast. So you've got to have those to make a loaf of bread, unless you want to leave the yeast out and have unleavened bread. That's got a very limited application, but it is there. You can do that. So of those 4, you can't actually say none of them are important, because they're all important. But if you don't have flour, you don't have good quality flour, the rest of it will be affected. So I'd say flour is super important. In the world of events, especially educational events, flour is your content. So if you don't have good quality content, and I know in my conversations with Dan, he told me before he read my book, he was pretty much always focused on the flour. Like, let's just have great flour. Well, if you don't mix the flour with some water, it's just flour. No one wants to eat just flour. I mean, it's going to fill your stomach because it'll be added, but that's going to be a yucky experience. So you got to have some water, and the salt is just for a little bit of taste. And then the yeast is what makes it rise. Now, think about this. I did this live experiment a few weeks ago where I brought the ingredients on stage and I was there to mix them together. And I unfortunately did not have the right proportions. I thought I did. So when I mixed it, there wasn't enough water to integrate all of the dough. And so some of the flour was left alone, and it was still flour. It wasn't part of the dough. And that's the second thing, communication. So water is communication. So if we're not communicating well at our events, it doesn't matter what amazing experiences that you've created, because people are feeling left out. They don't even know they should show up early because you've got this cool thing going on. They don't know about the party. They don't know that so-and-so is going to speak at this moment. They don't know about the group that you had where they could have been connecting and making plans 2 months before the event. If you don't have a good communication plan, and I've been to so many events where the only email you get is 3 days before the event. That doesn't set people up for a good experience. They have to figure it all out themselves, and maybe they do this big old brain dump 3 days before the event. Here's everything you need to know. That sounds good, but it doesn't actually serve your audience, especially those who want to make plans, who are like, hey, I want to plan out my agenda. I want to know where the gaps are in my agenda so I can have meetings. I want to know who else is coming to the event. So that's super important, is water. And then I would go to yeast third in the order there. And maybe it's not priority wise, but yeast is connections. So how connected do you feel to the community? So I recruit, and I think it's a smart idea for events to have people whose primary job, at least at the beginning, is to meet people, get to know who they are, and then make introductions, meaningful introductions, not just, I forget how you say your name. Is it Myra, or how do you say it?
Mariah. That's okay.
Mariah.
Mariah, yeah.
I meant to ask you pre-call. Mariah, I'd like to introduce you to Dan. I think you guys would love each other. And then I disappear. That's not a very good connection. But if I say, you know what, Mariah, the reason I think you should meet Dan is you guys are both passionate about culture. You're both passionate about developing the next generation of leaders. And we had this really interesting conversation where I was telling you about the book that Dan wrote about that subject. I think you guys would love each other. Obviously, this is fictitious. You already love Dan, but now I've given you something to talk about. And then when I see that you're talking, I disappear. Now, the more people are doing that meaningfully at the beginning of an event. So most events like this, unless it's an event for your company or where everybody knows each other, you're coming as a stranger.
Yeah.
And when people arrive as strangers, there's this fight or flight syndrome where we've got to help them feel relaxed and connected. So that's why I think yeast is so important, the connections that you make with people. And that's part of first impressions, but it goes beyond first impressions because it's really how do we make meaningful connections? Everyone needs at least a couple of friends, in my opinion. If you are going to an event and you don't need to meet anyone and it's available online, why not stay home? So I think if someone's making the effort to get in a car, train, or plane, or maybe boat to get to your event, then they came partially because there's something they want to experience in community. So if we can help them feel like they are part of a community, and I think that starts long before they ever arrive. You know, I argue that first impressions start when they hit purchase.
Yes. Oh, so good.
Right.
Yes. So good. I love that. And I know you actually had your little quote at the top by Jesse Cole, and he talks about that. The moment people purchase, right, they are having fun. And I love that.
Yeah.
I would love to know, and I'm hoping this is a question you haven't had before, without sharing, names. We'll protect the innocent here. Do you have any funny stories from events that you could share that you were just like, oh my gosh, maybe it wasn't done wrong. Maybe it was just a funny story. You've done enough events. You've been doing this for such a long time. I can only imagine the stories you must have. Are there any funny stories that you could share with us?
Funny in that it made me laugh or made
Or
people
crazy?
laugh or
Sure.
crazy.
Yeah.
You are asking me a question I should have asked for a little preparation on, but I did tell you, ask me on the fly. So here we are.
I love it. Yes. Challenge accepted.
Well, yeah. Jesse Cole, you just mentioned him with the Savannah Bananas, I think creates the best place where laughter and tears can all happen in the same place, and you're kind of lamenting with people. So when I went to see them, I saw 2 games back to back in April of 22. And I was in the Atlanta airport standing in line to get on the plane to Savannah. And in front of me are 2 people who are going to the game because one of them is wearing a Savannah Bananas hat. And the other one turns out to be the home plate umpire. And, and if you've seen the videos, that guy's crazy. Yeah. And he was a little bit crazy standing in line, but I had no idea because he introduces himself as either an engineer or an accountant. So, and then the other one was the sister of the rodeo cowboy. You've seen him pitch, and he's out there lassoing. So I think the things that burst out in those games that caused me to laugh were like watching him pull out his lasso and trying to catch someone running from first to second base, or the princess who, sat down next to me in the stands, and does a selfie with me, which was not funny, but it was like, she was there for the little kids. And then she sits down next to me. That was kind of funny, because obviously I'm not a little kid. So,
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So I think they do a great job of creating surprise moments. I don't know how much laughter, like hearty laughter was there, but there were definitely moments where we're all rolling, watching the things that are happening on the field or even in the stadium. Like when Jesse's throwing out t-shirts and then the last t-shirt he throws out is actually a pair of whitey tighties and he makes the guy put them on. And they've got a big banana on the front. It's that's like, great. Oh, that's embarrassing. And so that's kind of funny too. So
I love it. I love it. And that's so funny because I think, my next question is like the don'ts, but I feel like they do. I got to have Marie Matzinger on here she's their fans first director not too long ago. And, the things that they brainstorm that are like an absolute, we have to do, maybe not, or just no way. There's no way. But I'm like, I can't imagine there's not too many no ways in their belt.
I don't know. I mean, they are pretty wild in their brainstorming. And we've
Yeah.
started doing the same thing for our event, because one of the things, this is a great tip for your listeners. I
Yes.
break the event down into key moments.
Mm.
And then I break those key moments down into segments. So, think about first impressions. Well, I've got 12 steps in that welcome plan, or that first impressions plan, 12 touch points where people are having an opportunity to engage and connect deeper. But we're brainstorming every one of those. And some of them are just wild and crazy ideas, either too expensive or doesn't feel on brand or doesn't feel possible with the effort. So that might be the process the bananas go through as well, is like, that'd be really cool, but we don't have the resources right now, or there's not enough time to pull that off on game day, or, so there's things that they might say no way because of that, not because we would never do it.
Right.
That would be my thought. But in terms of like things never to do, one of my favorites, and I did write about this in the book, but it always comes to mind when someone asks these questions. So I won't name the event to protect the innocent, but it was a large event. And I was at one of the keynote sessions, and there were thousands of us in the room. And I don't even remember the speaker, but I do remember the speaker was dropping lots of knowledge gold, like point after point. And I was sitting with several other speakers who had been to our event, some of whom you'd recognize their names. And I was looking forward to having a conversation with them about some of what I was listening to. But what happened at the end of that keynote is something I'll never forget. So as soon as the keynote was over, the MC gets back up and makes whatever housekeeping notes there were, and then says, okay, we're going to need all of you to clear out of the room so we can get ready for the next speaker, high profile, yuckity yuck. And, so go enjoy the break, and then the next sessions will start in 30 minutes or whatever it was. I'm like, okay, I mean, that's fair. That needs to happen. Here's what I'll never forget. We stand up and the AV team decides, oh, let's have a Spinal Tap moment. 11 on the dial for the music, and let's put on something that's got a lot of beat to it so people won't stick around, they'll leave the room. So what happens when they do that is, I mean, those with hearing issues, obviously that's not a good experience, but what happened was that washed out of my brain every thought that I just had, because all I wanted to do was escape. I wanted to escape the noise, and the thoughts were gone. I had taken some notes, but I lost all my desire to talk about what had just happened. I literally don't remember a thing about it. I remember it was impactful. I remember nothing, because the music in that moment caused me to, want to flee. And I call it cow herding, because that's what they did with the music. They herded us and treated us like cows. We need to move them from point A to point B. The best way to do that is let's get them out of here with loud music, and then we'll accomplish our purpose. They could have done that differently. And the point of needing to clear the room for a high security issue, I get it. But you could have said, we need you to clear the room in about 5 minutes. They could have started the music at about a 5.
Right.
And given us time to move our way out and start our conversations and acknowledging, hey, something just happened. It's not about just moving people from point A to point B, back to the point about flour. This is what I call brick and mortar. So the brick was the session. The brick was great. They were treating it like, we're just giving you a lot of great bricks. But if you don't have mortar that connects the bricks, then your wall's going to fall down. And they were ignoring the fact that the mortar was, how do we get from session A to session B? What happens in between is important. It's not necessarily memorable. Like, that's not what people paid for. That's not what they came for. But that might be where they get that nugget, where someone says something about what was just shared in that session, and you all of a sudden have this idea, oh, I need to rename this first impressions. I mean, that was part of the mortar. That was before this session started, but I had that aha moment, and because there was space. That can happen at an event if you're thoughtful about, how do we connect point A to point B, brick A to brick B. That event did not do that well, and I noticed it and said, I'm never doing that on purpose. At least I probably have done it, but I haven't done it on purpose.
Wow. Yeah, that's really good. I think the energy flow of an event is just so important, right? From, like you said, all the way down to like the music and how that's such a great nugget. I did think of another question again that I did not prep you with, but it's okay. You've given me this challenge, and now my brain is like going to town. I would love to know, because you have done some really cool stuff And for those who are looking at this and thinking, wow, I would love to be in similar shoes someday. Phil, can you share with us, is there a pivotal moment in your story of how you've become who you are today that you can pinpoint? And I know this isn't really a necessary lunch and learn question. It's more of a getting to know you question, but I think it would be so helpful to hear a pivotal moment that you can directly connect to where you are today for our audience.
Well, I'm going to tell you a funny story first that will get me to the answer. So I was fresh out of college and I was hired as a computer programmer by Boeing Military Airplanes. And I was good at it, one of the best in my peer class, but I didn't really enjoy it. And then I went to this training session called Total Quality Management. And I was blown away by organized brainstorming and the way the guy led it. And I said, I've never experienced this before. And I went up to him after this 2-day workshop was done and said, how do I get your job someday? And here's what he told me, which is kind of similar to what you just said. He said, well, here's my story. Become a pastor for 30 years, have a heart attack, and then have your doctor say you can't be a pastor anymore. So go find another job. And that's how I'm here where I am. And I thought, well, that's not a very good career path. I'm not going to follow that. But my path is actually kind of similar. So it was like 5 years later, I did have a job doing that for a corporation. And then there was a recession in the late 90s and they laid off thousands of us. But it was in the Great Recession of 2008 and 9. I was in San Diego working for a church as a pastor of worship and working for a private school as a business manager. And when that recession hit, the school couldn't keep me on. And then the church said, we can't bring you on full time. And so I'm left with no job and wondering, what do I do? And then Mike finds me and says, I like you. You're a hard worker. And he starts throwing me small jobs and eventually a full-time job. And I went from being just someone who is there to do stuff. He called me director of summits, but really I was just doing what he asked me to do, to being director of events, where we realized, oh, I've actually been doing events pretty much my whole career. So there was not a linchpin moment for me. It was a gradual, well, I've got to find something to do. And in 2010, I had 5 jobs. Wow. I was working as a music teacher. I was working as a chapel assistant for an Air Force base. I was helping a guy with accounting for oil and gas. I was doing jazz gigs, and there was something else that was the 5th job. I was helping with Social Media Examiner, small little projects. So I was doing whatever I could to put food on the table. So I'd say the linchpin is be open and understand your gifts. Like, I'm a Swiss Army knife. You didn't ask for this, but I've got a lot of different skills and a lot of different passions, and has served me well in some respects. But it also, is hard when someone wants to pin you down and say, well, what's your expertise? I'm like, well, I can do this for you, and I can do this for you, and I can do this for you. And I think that, in the event space, that's great. But in a lot of companies, they want you to just be the expert engineer or accountant. So there's not a linchpin. It's been a progression. I've been doing events really since that first job at Boeing. They had me leading some things for my peers when I realized that's what I was good at. And then my next job, I was leading things. And then I was designing and overhauling trainings. And then when I worked for Koch Industries, I was leading massive trainings and getting great reviews on them and hearing things like, oh man, that's the best event I've ever been to in corporate America. I'm like, okay, the standard's not very high, is it? So I don't think there's a simple answer to your question, but maybe there's something instructive in all of that story.
Oh, actually, I got so much out of that. I too am a Swiss Army knife. I love, and I'm passionate about so many things. So I can fully relate to that. I've actually gotten a lot out of this interview myself. The water is who I am. I am I love emceeing, and that's something that I think is really important. A great MC can make or break an event, right? So
absolutely.
I know I'm not the only one that's gotten a lot. If we could narrow down to one action step that you would love to see, and I am going to talk about your summit because I actually think that would be an excellent action step as well. But if there's one action step you could say that our audience should take, what would that be?
After you buy my book,
Absolutely.
No,
Yes.
I think here's what I would say. And most events don't do this as well as they could. Get to know your audience. Who is your audience profile? Who are you designing the event for? One of our biggest mistakes, Mariah, is we design the event for ourselves instead of for the audience that's coming. And sometimes that audience is very close to who we are, so it's nuanced. In my case, I'm a 50 something year old man, and our ideal audience is a 30 or 40 something year old woman. So, the differences are in some respects obvious, in other respects, harder. Like, I'll just tell you one thing is, for about the first 4 or 5 years, we had jazz music played live by me in a band as people were walking in. And after year 3 or 4, people started saying, Phil, that music's, it's really good, but it's not quite the right energy and it's not my music. And I ignored them because I said, well, I'm just trying to create background music. I want you to talk to each other. And then over time, I started realizing, well, you know what? I need to play music that makes them feel like they belong here. So I need to figure out what their music, what their playlist is. Maybe I take the lyrics out because I do want them talking, but I want them to feel like we know who they are. And that was like one of those subtle little changes. Am I designing for the audience or am I designing for myself?
Ooh, good tip, man. Yes, I think we all tend to want to do things how we want to do them, right?
Yeah,
And design for
absolutely.
us. Okay, so we have multiple ways that people can work with you. Obviously, we've already mentioned the first one. Get the book, guys. I seriously, I can't. I really talk about this book so much, and also have sent it to people. So trust me, as soon as you read this, you're going to think of 5 people that you want to send the book to. What other ways can people work with you, Phil?
Well, you mentioned it already. Next week, I'm having a summit called Unforgettable Experience Design Summit. It's free if you attend in person. There's some options to get recordings for purchase. And you go to philmershon.com. Philmershon.com will actually take you to everything you need to know about the book, but then add /summit, and that'll take you to the description of the summit and a way to sign up for free. And Karen, you asked what's the name of the book. It is Unforgettable. And if you look for it on any online platform with my name, you'll find it and be able to purchase it. It releases next Tuesday, but I think they probably will start shipping even maybe late this week if they already have it in stock. So,
Yes, and we do have your website in the description, so you guys can find it that way as well. And I am typing it in as we speak. I'm trying. Thanks, Karen, for the question. I appreciate that. So the summit, I've signed up. I know of several people who have. Really looking forward. I've seen the speakers. Oh my gosh, you have some amazing speakers on there. Any other ways that others can work with you, Phil?
yeah, I'd say just connect with me via social. I'll be announcing some workshops, and I can do custom workshops for companies where we go deeper into this 2-3 hour workshops. And I'm exploring other opportunities. So right now, speaking is one of the main ways. And then I'll be hosting some of my own workshops. But we don't have it quite wired up yet, but as soon as my email list is wired up, I was supposed to do it last night, but there's only so many hours in the day.
Right.
Then you'll be able to get on my email list and you'll hear about things that I've got coming up. But in the meantime, actually, there's a Facebook group you can join. I don't know if you're part of that already, Mariah, but they can
No.
join the Unforgettable Experiences Facebook group. And that's the
Okay.
place where I will announce lots of things. And I think on LinkedIn too, there's a page that I've set up there, and I'll be announcing things on LinkedIn. So this is on LinkedIn, so maybe that's the better place to direct them. So I can get you hooked up with those 2 links after this is over.
Definitely. We'll add those. Definitely. Awesome. Oh my gosh, Phil, you dropped so much gold. Thank you for accepting a couple of questions that we did not prep with at all. And I hope I was able to get some that you weren't used to.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that. I think you've given so much already. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up? And then I think we'll call it good.
I like to wrap up with an experience. So we started with one. So let's end with one. Those of you in the audience who are listening, I would invite you to drop into the chat right now a word that you're going to take away from this conversation? And while we're waiting for those to come in, Mariah, why don't you tell me a couple words that stand out for you? And go ahead and drop those into the chat too, so that I can see them, because I'm going to play back a response to what you guys have taken away from this conversation.
I love it. The word that keeps coming to my mind with everything that you've talked about, and I know we're going to have a lot of replay watchers. That tends to be our audience, but exuberance. Exuberance is a word that keeps coming to mind.
I like that. That's not a word that I've had come up so far.
Oh, mortar. All
okay.
right.
All right. I like it. Exuberance and mortar, which those are two words that probably have never been in the same sentence, let alone in the same song, but they're going to be right now. So here you go. This will be my closing thought.
Woohoo! Yay! Oh my gosh, I love that so much.
And that is now called exuberant mortar.
I love it. Phil, oh my gosh, you have been such a delight. Thank you for being on here today. I absolutely am so excited to share this. This is going to go out to my LinkedIn, of course. It's going to go out to Dan Miller's LinkedIn. And I've actually got several people in mind I'm just going to directly send it to. So this has been an amazing interview. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be connected again.
Yes. All right, guys, until next time, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for commenting. Oh, and I'm just like still seeing the comments come in. Look at that. Okay, this is great. Until next time, join us again on the 48 Days Culture and Connection Show. Live creatively, friends. Bye.
Take care.